Good morning, and thank you very much, first of all, to Peter Messay for the opportunity of participating in this sixth edition of Wipes with this video. Sadly, I cannot be with you. I hope we'll meet face to face in the seventh edition. I'm going to talk about the cultural preservation of video games according with cultural heritage rules in the Spanish law. Because, well, video games are nowadays part of the offer of our entertainment. Many aspects of this sector are also part of the popular culture. Some video games IPs are as valuable as cinema, television, and literature ones. However, in the 70s and the 80s, the situation was different. On the one hand, computers were an expensive product and focused principally, first of all, in work. On the other hand, video games were perceived as toys and their selling was oriented to children. Entertainment software was not considered part of the great culture, but disposable goods, as cinema or television in the past. Despite this, we can find in countries like the United Kingdom of Spain examples of youngsters that founded software companies that are part of the history of video games. Titles like Manic Miner, programmers like Distemper Brothers, and marks like Ocean Software were well known. In the case of Spain, the 80s are marked as the golden age of video games industry. Computers like Spectrum and Astra series were very popular, and there was also place for Commodore or MSX, the computer from Japan. Between 1984 and 1992, many companies compete for controlling the Spanish market, but having little success exporting their products abroad. The end of the long extended hegemony of the 8-byte format also supposed the rapid decline of the sector and the finale of a glorious period never repeat. This, La Pulga, is the first official Spanish video game from the year 1983, and it's the first step in the way of this golden age. Here we have some companies, many of them were founded in the middle of the 80s, and many of them disappeared in the beginning of the 90s. Maybe the longest one was Dynamic, maybe the first and maybe the last, but all of them, the glorious period is almost the same, with some exceptions. But to establish an example of this situation, computers are expensive and video games are for children, and actually they are not culture, we can have the example of La Abadía del Crimen, a title of the year 1987, and for many people, me also, the best video game in the history of the Spanish software. The idea of the Abadía del Crimen needs a little remembrance about the copyright economic rights, because, well, we have, remember, reproduction, public performance, recording, broadcasting, translation, and adaptation. We are going to take that. Because the authors of La Abadía del Crimen wanted to present this game as an adaptation of the novel of Umberto Eco, Il nome della rosa, the name of the rose. Well, but the titles are different. Why? Because when they ask Eco for the authorization, so the game could be a derivative work of the novel, there are two versions: no answer and a negative answer. At last, the conclusion is the same: no authorization. So they decided to go ahead, doing some changes. First, the title, from El nombre de la rosa, El nome de la rosa, the name of the rose, to La Abadía del Crimen. But The first title that Eco wanted to give to his novel was actually La Abadía del Crimen, in the Spanish translation. The main character, from William of Baskerville to William of Ockham, but originally Eco thought about the possibility of William of Ockham as the main character. After that, he changed the idea because, first of all, he didn't like very much the Venerabilis Inceptor, and secondly, he wanted to pay an homage to Sherlock Holmes. And the book was changed from the second book of Aristotle, Poetic, to the Coena Cipriani. The Coena Cipriani is an important book in the novel, but not the most important book. But it's present in the novel. So these changes were principally aesthetical. But on the other hand, they not change other aspects directly taken from the novel. For example, the time slot 7 days, the plot, the inquiry about some murders of monks, and at last the library as a forbidden place, built like a labyrinth, or as a labyrinth. So, to tell you the truth, I think that there are many violations of IP rights, of copyright in this video game, but maybe because it was not a success, maybe because video games were considered in these days as toys. No one noticed it or no one cared because no one, nor Eco, nor a representative of Eco, claimed or sued OperaSoft, the distributor or the programmers, for these violations, this vulneration of IP rights. I think in this moment the situation should be or could be very, very different. But well, this is not time for Ukrainians. At last, well, this is an example, and as I said before, the golden age of Spanish video games came to an end at the beginning of the 90s, but not many years after that, maybe at the end of the 90s, began a movement of reivindication of the legacy of this period. For example, the co-author of Bugaboo, La Pulga, created the last year a new version of the video game for Steam and the Google Play Store. And, for example, two programmers created a remake of La Abadía del Crimen, taking more aspects of the novel and also from the picture, the film directed by Jean-Jacques Sano in 1986. Is an extended version with more characters, more clues, and the soundtrack of the film. I have to say that it's a clear example of the wrong perspective or wrong idea that many people have about the IP rights, because, well, this game is free. Authors are not earning any money, but we all know how copyright goes, and this explanation is not a justification for using without authorization, not even in the name of the remake. There is no justification for taking protected works by IP law. But also we have books books about the history of computers, Spectrum, Amstrad, about the history of companies, history of Dynamic, or the history of AD, about some kind of games, interactive fiction, La Aventura Colosal, and also focused in La Abadía del Crimen, Obsequium. All of them are very, very recent books. The oldest one is from 2016, and all of them have been written by people that were children when these games and these computers were in the market. So maybe an excess of nostalgia, maybe, but also a representation of the importance of Spanish video games from the 80s in the Spanish culture. For example, we can see this, an homage by the National Company of Mailing to La Abadía del Crimen 5 years ago, a commemorative stamp series of the 30th anniversary of the start of the publication of the game. Not bad for a cult game. And at last, the National Library of Spain is looking for video games. This is a company looking for video games. Estamos buscando juegos. Can you help us? ¿Puedes ayudarnos? Because they are trying to apply a rule from the Legal Deposit Act. Because they say the bibliographic, sound, visual, audiovisual, and digital heritage of Spain culture is one of the richest and most representative in the world, and must be preserved for the benefit of present and future generations. There is a recognition, a declaration of video games as part of cultural heritage. So, wow, this rule and the library are only applying a constitutional mandate, a constitutional obligation. Public administration will grant conservation and promote enrichment of cultural, historical, and artistic heritage of all Spanish people and their belongings, regardless of their juridical nature of ownership. The protection of cultural heritage in Spain is developed through many acts, regional acts, and 2 national acts about material and immaterial cultural heritage. So now, video games, with the condition of antiquity and especially historicity, must be preserved, must be protected, must be conserved. How? Well, maybe we could begin with the protection established by the IP law. Video games are computer programs, so we are going to protect the sequence of instruction, the preparatory documentation, the technical documentation, the user manuals, and the successive versions. But in the cultural perspective of video games are only computer programs. For example, with Megacorp, this interactive fiction, there is also a plot, a history, an interactive history. We as gamers are part of the history. And this is an aspect of creativity, of originality, that shall be protected beyond the concept of the code, the documentation, the version, the manual. But also, we have to protect the packaging. For example, these covers from Alfonso Aspiri are part of the history of the Spanish video game software because they contributed to sell many games. We have here Camelot Wars and Similar Profanation, 2 video games, and 1 book, a compilation of all covers made by Aspiri between the 80s and the 90s. So, this artistic, pictorial aspect should be protected also. As a conclusion, I think that video games are another example of the transformation from immediate consumer products to part of the cultural heritage, as part of the digital heritage must be preserved. But in the process of preservation, we have not only to protect the aspects included for computer programs in the IP law, but also every accessory element relevant from a cultural point of view. Thank you very much.